You probably don't have any trouble sitting down to play video games or scrolling through your social media. In fact, you might even be able to spend a couple of hours in front of a screen without even getting distracted. But when it comes to pushing yourself through a challenging workout or an extra session on technique, it's a different story. You know that training hard and staying consistent will make you a better athlete in the long run, but your brain seems to crave the easier stuff, like video games, TV, or just chilling out. So what makes the harder things, like working out, feel like such a struggle? Well, the answer lies in the way our brains process dopamine. Understanding dopamine and motivation. Dopamine is often thought of as a pleasure molecule, but in fact it's more accurately described as a desire molecule. Dopamine is what gives us the drive to pursue something that feels rewarding. When you sit down to play a game, watch a movie, or check your social media, your brain releases dopamine in anticipation of the enjoyment you'll get. But with something like a long or hard training session, dopamine release isn't as immediate, so you don't feel as naturally motivated to do it. To understand how dopamine affects behaviour, let's look at some well-known studies involving rats conducted by Paul Phillips and his colleagues at the University of North Carolina in 2003. Phillips placed electrodes in the reward centres of the rats' brains. Each time the rats pressed a lever, dopamine would be released into their brains, triggering an intense craving to keep pressing the lever. The rats did so repeatedly, ignoring food, water or sleep, driven solely by the dopamine hit. Then the experiment was reversed and the dopamine release was blocked. Now the rats wouldn't even get up to drink water or eat, even though they still enjoyed food when it fed to them directly. The issue wasn't pleasure, it was motivation. Dopamine was the factor that got them up and kept them going. Without it, they didn't feel like doing anything. Dopamine in our daily lives. So for us in our daily lives, dopamine works similarly. Activities that trigger high dopamine, like playing games or getting a like on social media, are effortless because our brains are motivated by the promise of that dopamine hit. But the low dopamine payoff from things like long training sessions or repetitive drills just doesn't spark the same kind of drive. And in our tech-driven world, we're constantly surrounded by sources of instant dopamine, like video games, social media, or on-demand streaming, which create a kind of dopamine overload. But here's the problem. The more we flood our brains with high dopamine activities, the more we get used to them. Our bodies simply adjust to these dopamine levels by building a tolerance, much like alcohol. Over time, we need more dopamine to feel the same reward. This tolerance makes low dopamine activities like training, studying, or even stretching seem dull and unappealing in comparison. This explains why training can feel like a grind. When your brain is accustomed to constant high dopamine, it naturally craves it, making you gravitate towards easy, high dopamine activities instead of something that might actually benefit you. Dopamine Cleanse, a reset for your brain. So, how do we reset our brain? There is a way to reset this tolerance and make the hard stuff feel easier. Yes, it's called a dopamine cleanse. The idea is simple. Spend a day where you avoid high dopamine activities. This means for one whole day, no social media, no video games, no junk food, just the basics. By giving yourself a break from these dopamine-heavy distractions, your brain's dopamine levels begin to reset. This process helps you become more sensitive to lower dopamine activities, which makes these tasks feel like a struggle. If you're constantly blasting your brain with high dopamine, then low dopamine activities like training simply seem unrewarding. But if you reduce your tolerance, these activities all of a sudden become more engaging. Allow yourself to be bored. Go for a walk. Reflect on your goals. Write down any ideas on paper. Just don't use your phone. This may sound simple, but the effects on your focus and motivation can be profound. Training the brain with the power of rewards. While a full dopamine cleanse can help you reset, you can also apply dopamine management to your training routine. For example, try using high dopamine activities as rewards for completing challenging sessions. Let's say you're working on a difficult skill or pushing through a conditioning routine. Reward yourself with a set amount of screen time, gaming, or whatever feels like a treat after the session. This approach does two things. It trains your brain to associate training with the reward, and it prevents you from indulging in high dopamine activities without actually working for them. The key here is to do the hard stuff first, then reward yourself after. If you indulge in high dopamine activities before training, you're less likely to want to train afterward. So start with the hard work, then enjoy the high dopamine activity as a reward. Dopamine tolerance and long-term change. To understand why this approach works, think of it like eating at a fancy restaurant every day. After a while, that becomes your new normal. But if you were suddenly on a deserted island with only plain rice, that rice would feel like a feast. The dopamine cleanse works similarly. By starving your brain of constant stimulation, even basic activities start to feel more satisfying. If a full cleanse feels extreme, then try a modified version. Pick one high dopamine activity like social media or video games and avoid it for a day each week. Use that one day to focus on activities that are usually low dopamine, like training, reading, or goal setting. The point is to help your brain recover from the constant high dopamine stimulation, making it easier to find satisfaction in low dopamine activities. You might also notice that you actually start looking forward to training and other low dopamine activities as they become more rewarding over time. By managing your dopamine, you'll naturally be more inclined to focus on the things that help you grow as an athlete. What about dopamine cleansing for a better performance? If you want to take it a step further, make a weekly commitment to avoid certain high dopamine activities altogether, or cut back as much as possible. Gradually connect dopamine with activities that directly contribute to your long-term goals, like training, practicing, or studying your sport. The best part? You can design a reward system that fits your needs. For example, after an intense workout or a full day of training, allow yourself some downtime with a high dopamine activity. One example could be 15 minutes of screen time for every hour of training, or a small snack after practice. Remember to embrace the hard things. Training your brain to crave long-term rewards over immediate gratification isn't easy, but the payoff is worth it. When you limit your exposure to constant high dopamine hits, the activities that seemed unappealing, like working out or stretching, reviewing game footage, become more satisfying. Eventually, you'll find yourself motivated to keep going, not because you're forcing it, but because you've retrained your brain to find pleasure in things that make you better. In the end, we're all dopamine driven to some extent. Dopamine can be a powerful motivator, pushing you to reach your goals and improve yourself as an athlete. The key is to control where that dopamine comes from. Are you going to keep getting it from things that don't contribute to your growth? Or will you start associating it with things that push you forward? The choice is yours. Start small by managing dopamine in your daily life. Reward your hard work, and then you'll find that the path to becoming a better athlete becomes easier with each step. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, click like and subscribe. It really helps our channel and helps us to improve and continue to bring you more fascinating insights and tips on sports, technology and business, which help you become a better athlete.